Yes, it's number one. It's Top of the Pops.
The first song to feature on the programme is all lined up, but first, let's speak to the first presenter. I'm delighted to say he's on the phone, Sir Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed.
That first programme in January 1964, what do you remember about that?
Well, I remember everything about it because it was Footsteps in the Sand. It had never been done before, and the only reason it was on was because a television producer called Barney Colohan, who made The Good Old Days and It's a Knockout and all those wonderful programmes, said to me, shall we do a pilot about your Radio Luxembourg radio programme, the Teen and 20 Disc Club? And I said, yeah, all right, which we did in the church hall in Manchester. We called it the Teen and 20 Record Club. Offered it to the BBC, naturally him being a BBC man, and they said, yes, this will get our children out of our hair because the children of BBC executives are giving her a hard time because there's no pop music things on. And so they decided they wouldn't call it the Teen and 20 Record Club, they call it Top of the Pops. And so that's why I did the first one, because it was a takeoff of the programme I was doing on Radio Luxembourg.
And Sir Jim, we're all set to play the very first record that featured on the show. Before we do, let's have the introduction you gave it.
Hey, she's beautiful, we love her, we know you love her, Dusty Springfield.
Number 40.
Come in, Paul Burnett.
Hey, Shaun, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Paul. So, when I say 1974, your first appearance on Top of the Pops, 30 years ago this year, I bet it doesn't seem like that, does it?
It doesn't when you say it like that. 30 years ago, good God. Yeah. No, it doesn't. It just seems like yesterday. You know, I wasn't one of the sort of really regular presenters. I did quite a few, but I always got the impression that they always got in touch with me when they couldn't find anybody else, you know what I mean? No, I did a lot of them, and they were great fun.
Hello, David Hamilton.
Hi, Shaun. How are you?
Well, I'm all right, David. More to the point, how are you?
Well, I'm a bit croaky. Every now and then my voice cracks up, and it's been very unusual because the last couple of days I've actually been off the air, which is, you know, is very unusual for me. But these things happen, and there's a lot of it doing the rounds at the moment.
Now, the years you presented the show, David, 1975 to 1977, and that was a time when Top of the Pops was at its peak. And I guess, in terms of family viewing, it was a must-see programme, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, Shaun, and I think the thing at that particular time was that whole families would sit around the television on a Thursday night and watch the show together, maybe with their meals on their laps, and everybody, there was a great deal of speculation. Everybody wanted to know what was going to be number one that week, and we had people who were dancing. We had all Radio 1 DJs who were the compares of the show, and it was the music was very happy, sing-along. It was a show that I always aspired to do, as you can imagine, and I was working as a television announcer for one of the ITV companies, and I was under contract for them for a long time. I wasn't able to do it, and when finally I got permission to do it, I was so excited, but when I got into the studio, I was amazed how small it was. You know, the clever impression given is a much bigger studio, but in fact there were only about 100 teenagers in there, and they were being herded from one set, so you would have Rod Stewart on one set, and then they'd be herded over to another set where, you know, maybe Elton John would be, and the floor manager just sort of moved them around from set to set. And that was the thing that amazed me in the first place, was how much smaller it was than it seemed when you were watching at home.
Here's another past presenter of TV's Top of the Pops. Welcome, Andy Peebles.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Andy. Thank you very much for taking part in our 40th anniversary of Top of the Pops special on Magic's Retro Chart Years. Now, we've been doing the research about you as well. It says down here, so it's not to be argued with, first show, 1979.
Yeah, that's probably about right. I mean, I never understood why they booked me. I've got the perfect face for radio. Let's get the appallingly old gag out of the way. I suppose, really, I was there in an era where if you were a new boy on the block at Radio 1, there seemed to be a sort of deal, unspoken though it may have been, that you got a bit of television exposure. So from that point of view, I suppose it was greatly to my advantage, and I happily remember going along and being put into the tender, loving hands of Robin Nash and Michael Hurl, the two producers of that era. But I did join at a period when, of course, normally the programme was double-headed. The fact that I had experienced television people alongside me, the Mike Reeds and the Peter Powells and people like that, I think probably made life easier for me. Because it's an odd programme. You probably got about 8 or 9, maybe 10 if you're lucky, seconds to actually look at the camera and introduce the records. And I used to actually say that I thought having a presenter on in vision was a complete waste of time, and that if they just used one of our voices, which, let's be fair, were fairly well known on the radio, they could get another act on. And Robin Nash said to me, well, that's like turkeys voting for Christmas. And I said, no, it's just a personal observation, but I don't really see the need. And to be perfectly honest, Sean, I still don't.
Kid Jensen.
Hey, Sean, how are you, man?
I'm very well, thanks. Now, isn't that funny? A few moments ago, we were speaking to Andy Peebles.
Oh, yes.
And his first Top of the Pops we mentioned was in 1979. But what we didn't mention, we're holding back the best bit, you see, is that his very first Top of the Pops was under your guidance.
Andy Peebles' first Top of the Pops.
Yeah. His first appearance on Top of the Pops, right at the end of the programme, an edition from October 1979. You had the job of introducing him and saying that he'd be presenting the show the following week. So Andy Peebles' first official appearance on Top of the Pops was on one of your editions.
So he owes his whole career to me then?
Yeah, well, so it would seem. And it is wonderful to repeat the experience of talking to the legend that is Pete Murray.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. Nice to talk to you again.
Now, Long John Baldry, he was somebody that you were really with from the beginning, wasn't he?
Yeah, I rated him very highly. He was a great rhythm and blues singer, and also a good jazz man. And to me, he had everything. And I really... the one sad thing about Long John Baldry is that, you know, he had a very strange thing. He was warned that if he stayed in this country by some psychic, something terrible would happen to him, so he shot off to Canada, and we never really heard very much more about him after that, which is very sad. You know, I think some of these people that give these psychic readings can be very dangerous, and it had an adverse effect on him, without any doubt at all.
So when we mention it's 40 years of Top of the Pops, Pete, I bet it doesn't seem like 40 years for you, does it?
It certainly doesn't, no. Seems like yesterday.
Pete, thank you so much for coming on the programme. It's wonderful to talk to you again.
Sean, my pleasure.
Dave Lee Travis.
Hello, Sean, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Dave. Thanks for coming on.
No problem.
The man who was known as the presenter who would always go that little bit further when hosting the show, i.e., joining the likes of Queen and Mud on Stage, for instance.
You're talking about me, then?
Yes. Who else would I be talking about? Nobody else would dare do that. Would they, joining bands like that midway through performances?
Well, I suppose not. You know, I just used to feel that Top of the Pops, for me, had to be fun. And I don't know at what period of Top of the Pops I decided that they were starting to take themselves a little bit seriously. And as you intimated, the getting up on stage, I am very proud of the fact that I hope that some of your listeners out there can help me with this, because I need to find it on video. I'm willing to pay money for it.
Which performance are we talking about?
The performance with Queen on Top of the Pops. They were doing 7 Seas of Rye, and I'd introduced them, and I don't know what came over me, but then you think Queen now, deadly serious group, but at the time, you know, they were like any other young sort of hungry group, but they were a step above everybody else. It was fairly obvious at that time even. But I put on a brown dust coat, and I got a long-handled broom, and while they were on stage performing 7 Seas of Rye, I actually went onto the stage at the back and started sweeping up.
It's my mucker, Paul Jordan.
A pleasure, Sean. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Now, going back to the mid-'80s when you presented the show, how nervous were you, bearing in mind that you'd watched it for all those years, and there you were, all of a sudden, on the top of the Pops floor, ready to do your first programme. How nervous were you when you got around to your first announcement?
Well, you tend not to be too nervous at all after you've drunk half a bottle of whiskey before going on. But, a little bit of nerves. But you've got to remember, back in those days, I'm not too sure whether they operate it the same way now. Back in those days, you rehearsed it once in the afternoon, again, the full show, later on in the afternoon as you were going to present the show, and then they did the live recording. This is on the Wednesday, because it went out on the Thursday evening. On the Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, you recorded for the third time, as live, the show with the audience and everything in there. And they taped it, and that's how it was going to go out the next day.
Here he is, Richard Skinner.
Well, how are you doing, Shaun?
I'm very well, thanks, Richard. So we've just heard a clip of you in 1981, this very week back in 1981.
And wasn't it good? I impressed myself.
Oh, I tell you, it was terrific. As clips go from January 1981, that's one of the best I've ever heard. But it was the year before, in 1980, when you made your first appearance with somebody else that we were talking to earlier on. I mean, you just can't really get a better person to join the Top of the Pops team with than Sir Jimmy Savile.
Absolutely, because one thing you can absolutely guarantee is that he will totally hog the camera and you can just sit in the background.
Is that what he did?
He did it, absolutely. You see, what happened was they decided to put news on Top of the Pops. You know, pop stories. Very short-lived experiment. I could have stepped in from in my last days at Newsbeat and did this news thing. And all I know is I was totally in awe of Jimmy, and he just made me look like the bloke in the corner, you know. It was just fantastic.
It's Tony Blackburn.
Yes, hello there. Hi.
I'm very well, thanks, Tony. You and I did a show together recently, of course.
That's right. Yeah, the Rewind show, wasn't it?
That's right. And we're back together again, celebrating Top of the Pops, this time the 40th birthday. And I would imagine this has been an incredibly busy time for you the last couple of weeks. So many people obviously wanting to talk to the likes of yourself and Sir Jimmy Savile and various other people about the programme as well. So you're probably sick of doing these things now, aren't you?
You're actually the first person that's asked me anything about it, to be absolutely honest with you. I'll be absolutely honest, no, you're the first person.
Well, I thought you were very good on TV with Dale Winton last week.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
So at least it's been marked in some way, but we couldn't let it pass the 40th anniversary without doing some sort of programme. So what was the most enjoyable aspect of presenting Top of the Pops for you?
Well, I mean, in the early days, I'm talking about in the late 60s, early 70s, I mean, the programme just had an enormous audience. I mean, there obviously weren't the satellite television programmes around, so it was just an enormously powerful show to do, apart from anything else. I mean, it was one of those shows that everybody watched.
And I think we'll close the show in the way we started it. More words from Sir Jimmy Savile.
Number one. Right, now then. What have we got here? We have got some Womble-type admirers here, ladies and gentlemen. They said, can we come on the telly with you? So I said, certainly come on the telly, because you see, even now, if I wasn't talking like this, you would hear a lot of noise. You see, well, a lot of noise is that there's Slade getting on, because it's number one time, and here they come, it's Slade.
Yes, the Christmas 73 number one was still on top in January 1974. Slade, a Merry Christmas, everybody.